Hello and welcome to Knit, Design, Edit, Sleep, Repeat with Lisa Conway, Denise Finley, and Tiffany Wooten. Let's listen in and see what's happening, who's happening, and what's new in their world.
Listen while Tiffany and I ramble our way through a comparison of knit and crochet crafts, especially as seen through the eyes of tech editors.
One. Begin. Hey, hey,
Hi,
hey, it's me, Mario.
Tiffany!
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I can't wait to see what that edits out like. Guys,
Okay, we can redo it again.
No, not going to do
No,
that. I'm going to just
no.
tell everybody we are going to
I
be
mean,
ourselves today.
we
And
are
we get like
ourselves today. We do get like
we are.
this,
Yeah.
especially
And
when the
and
coffee starts kicking in.
and especially given the fact that you've had very little sleep because you've had one
I
night off
have.
in 2 weeks.
I have.
Actually,
Yeah,
more than 2 weeks.
it's been a very long couple of weeks. So yeah, we do. I do have a tendency to get a little punchy. And for those who haven't caught on, I do work nights, and Lisa is 3 hours behind me. So it's really essentially morning for both of us, and our morning coffee's kicking in for both of us. So hang on for the ride. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, this is going to be really amazingly interesting.
I hope y'all
Anyway,
enjoy the laughs.
yeah, I'm sure I guarantee you that I'm going to enjoy the laughs as I go through editing this. But today, people, for your information, because Tiffany is a crochet tech editor and I'm a knit tech editor, and neither one of us really crosses that boundary, at least not yet. I hope to add crochet someday. And I have edited a couple of crochet patterns, but simple ones.
Yeah. And
Nothing.
I've edited some basic knitting ones. And when I got in over my head, reached out for some help from some other wonderful people. So yeah,
Yeah.
but our in-depth knowledge of the other craft is very lacking compared to our own craft. So
Exactly. And while I do crochet, I've never crocheted a garment. That's on my bucket list because
I
I've
did
never
a
done a garment.
I've got a knit tank in there that I still haven't finished. So I don't know if that counts.
Well, you've at least approached the idea of it. I've never
I
even
discovered
approached
I
the idea.
I discovered I actually enjoy knitting in the round, so it's very soothing. That's kind of what
It
drew me
is.
in.
It is. It is very nice. I like to knit in the round. Um, that's,
Yeah,
yeah. You can just kind of
it's
sit there and do.
yeah, it's the Lorraine's Lace by Ophelia Cat. I found her during the Uplift Make Along back in 2021. It's made out of We Crochet Knit Picks Dishy, and it's actually a really pretty piece. I'm up to like it's bottom up, so that's new for me. I've never done bottom up, and I'm up to the neck bind off, and I've got to do the collar and the sleeves, and that's it. I'm done. But because I haven't had any time, I haven't gotten it finished. But it's actually a really great piece, and I'll put the links up for you so that you can share it in the show notes in case anybody wants to look at it because it's a really great summer piece, and because it's cotton and it's dishy at that, it can go in the washer and dryer, and it works great. So I'm really excited about it.
I'm really curious. How does Dishy compare to some of the other worsted weight cottons like, uh, what is it? Oh,
I find I so the stuff like the cone cotton at like Walmart and that kind of thing. I can't think of the
mm-hmm.
brand, but I know what
Lillian
you're talking
cream or
about.
something
There
like
you
that.
go. Yeah, I find it softer than Lillian cream. It's a little bit thicker than Lillian cream, so I think it stands up better. My mom and I have used it for. My mom has made thousands of hundreds of dishcloths out of Dishy, and they have all held up magnificently between me and her and my grandmother and my great aunt and my aunt. And like, she just makes them when she gets into a funk. That's what she makes. Some people turn it to socks. She did dishcloths for a lot of years. This year she's turning to socks, but it is actually held up really, really well for this beginner knitter who's figuring out making a garment in the round and all the things that go with it. um it has actually, it doesn't seem to be stretching too much, which is nice. I'm really looking forward to that part of it.
Yeah.
And it's actually got a really nice stitch definition. So, and they've got a ton of colors.
How does it wash? Can you put it in hot water and, like using it as a
um
dishcloth, you're using it in real hot water. And
I use it in
the
hot water
Lillian,
when I wash. Yep, and it doesn't bleed. When I
okay.
wash them in the washing machine, everything goes in cold because I'm a lazy washer, so everything goes in cold with the detergents. But it holds up great in the sink. I use them in the sink
Okay.
all the time, and I actually have gotten to the point I take them to work in my lunchbox as a reusable napkin at work, because I can never seem to find a napkin at work other than the rough brown paper towels. So I take those and they work great. They hold,
Wonderful.
they double as a coaster. And so yeah,
S-
I'll give you the links to put in the show notes for that. It's a beautiful piece. So
Oh, I like Knit Picks We Crochet Yarns anyway. They're a
yeah.
great price point. Get my mouth to work. Price
Hmm.
point, and they've got
They're an
good
amazing
quality
price point.
fibers and all of that. So yeah. Well, let's move into the tech editing and the pattern comparisons. I have my first question. Um, do crochet patterns include that romance section at the beginning, the intro that gives the inspiration of the pattern and that sort of thing, like knit patterns now do?
They do. They do. And just like in knit patterns, some people are better at it than others. And unfortunately, I'm not one of them. Which makes it a little bit hard as an editor to be able to help them. But yeah, they do come with the romancing of the pattern and the romance language of, this is why you should make this beautiful piece, and this is what will come with this beautiful piece. And um, I think it kind of helps set the expectation. And this is my opinion of it, is even if some people don't quite romance it, I think an intro is needed, regardless of the craft, whether it's crochet,
Right.
Tunisian, or knit, because it helps set the expectation of what the piece is. What is this? And okay, I can see from the picture it's a shirt. Great. What's so great about this shirt? Oh, okay, it's got a lace section to it, and the front is all solid. Okay, cool. Is this bottom up? Is it top down? That's my
Yeah,
opinion. I don't know
giving
how you
a
feel
bit of
about it.
detail.
Yes.
Yeah, it's in as a knit tech editor, I look at the romance that comes with a pattern in terms of, is this really marketing the piece to its best advantage?
Yes.
Right. And does it give the right kind of detail? And I do look at that. I don't often change it much unless there's like a grammatical error.
Yeah.
But I
I
have, for especially a brand new designer, I have kind of walked through it a little bit more and, hey, I noticed your pattern has this in it, but you don't talk about it in your romance. And you might want to put that there because it's interesting detail that a knitter looking at your pattern might find helpful, kind of
mhm.
thing. So, okay, well, eh, I guess regardless of what type of pattern it is, you're still marketing it. And to me, that's the marketing portion. So,
Very much so. Very much
okay.
so. Yeah. Yeah, and I think
So,
that's one of those things that, we do have to be able to market our own stuff, and even if it is difficult, it is, and that's the blurb that you can kind of copy and paste into your shop, whether it's Etsy or your website, or I think Ravelry does it. I don't even remember
Yes.
anymore.
Yes,
But
Ravelry does
you
do
know,
that.
if it is a well written romance, you can copy and paste it everywhere. You spend the time on one intro and you can use it in 1,000 places. And
Right.
that's
It's
the
a very
smarter,
good
not harder
example.
portion.
Yes, exactly. It's a good example of being able to repurpose. And believe me, in marketing, repurposing is the key.
It really is.
With 1,000 places that you need to market yourself and your work,
Hmm.
it's so important to find those pieces that you can use over and over again. So,
Very much so. Okay.
well, the next thing we usually find in a knitting pattern would be skill levels. And I know the Craft Yarn Council has skill levels for both knit and crochet, don't they?
I believe there are skill levels written. I don't know if they're actually defined. I know that one of one of the girls on Instagram that I know, she was working on kind of solidifying a skill level set, but I don't know if she ever got it solidified, if that makes sense.
So
Um,
it's not, it's her standard, but not necessarily.
well, she was actually crowdsourcing, and I'm trying to look up her
Oh,
handle real
okay.
quick. She was crowdsourcing from. She had actually put up a quiz, and was attempting to crowdsource from other makers. You know, what would you consider beginner? What would you consider? And she was using a lot of she was getting with designers, and she was getting with other makers and that kind of thing, and she was kind of trying to help make a
A standard.
a standard, yeah, because there's not I don't know if there's actually a definitive standard written anywhere for either side, quite honestly. Like, everybody can kind of be like, well, I think this is. Now, I will challenge a designer, because some of them actually do list, skill levels. I will challenge a designer if I do not think the skills needed for the pattern match what the designer has listed. So, like,
Yes.
if they have listed it as a adventurous beginner, and I consider it more of an intermediate advanced pattern, I will challenge them, and I will tell them about that. And Drea's hook, that's what it was. Her name is Andrea. That was her. That's her handle. I couldn't think of it. It was making me crazy. Sorry. Um, Andrea was trying to kind of solidify it, and she's had a lot of things going on. She's gotten married in the last year, so I think that may be one of her projects that kind of took a back seat. But she does have a skill level assessment quiz, and that's kind of where it spawned. Was she was like, let's do a skill level quiz to help you figure out where you are, and then let's try and solidify the skill levels. um,
That's really cool. I like the
it,
fact that
it what it is, it's actually a really nice quiz, and I know some designers who are like, hey, if you don't know where you are, take this quiz and see if it'll point you in the general realm of where you are.
right. Well,
um,
I know that on the knitting side, having been trained by the Knitting Guild Association as a tech editor, they push really hard the skill levels that have been written by the Craft Yarn Council.
mhm,
Now, I know that not everybody uses those as their basis, but that's
right.
usually where I start and kind of move forward. But I also tend to recommend to my designers, rather than using a level, that they actually list the skills in the pattern that are going to be necessary, because people can look at that and much more easily say, well, I can do this, this, and this, but I'll have to research that. And I'm willing to do that.
That was actually something I just saw on a knitting pattern here very recently that I was looking at, and I don't remember what pattern it was, but I was very intrigued by that idea. And I actually really like that idea because, like you, it puts it up front. It makes it very clear of, okay, can you cast on in the round? Do you know how to do a foundationless chain or a foundationless half double crochet? No? Okay, here's what you need to know. And I'm with you. I very much like that idea. I don't know how we could go about categorizing that as a skill level per
Right.
se, but I do like listing the skills. I saw that and I was very, very intrigued by that.
Well, I think it's more important to list what skills are used in the pattern than a level, because if you say a pattern is intermediate, for
Hmm.
example, and you've got an adventurous beginner, they may see intermediate and not take the leap because they don't think they're there yet.
They may balk
Whereas
at it.
in
You're right.
reality, everything that's in that pattern is in terms of skills used, they may know 99% of it, if
Yeah,
not all.
yeah, you're right. And
So,
it may be very, yeah, that's very valid because they may be very, very open to challenges.
right. And
So yeah, I do,
or, well,
I
I'm
did.
ready
I
for
was
this
very
challenge, but I'm not ready for that one.
correct. Like I was, okay, I'm ready to start knitting in the round. Maybe I can conquer a beginning lace section, because I learned the SSK on this particular tank that I've been talking about, the Lorraine's lace. I learned SSK and casting on in the round. So those were two new things that I learned on this one. But anything else beyond that, as far as lace, or yeah, probably not.
Well,
But yeah,
talking about SSK, if you want a little help, I have it's not quite a one pass SSK, but it's very close to a one. Well, it is a one pass SSK because you never take the stitches off the left needle. And I have a
uh-huh.
tutorial for it on the podcast YouTube channel.
Okay,
And there's backup links to the person who taught it to me and his recordings. So
I like it.
there's
I'll be
lots of different
hunting for
ways
that.
to. Yep,
I'll be
it's
hunting for
the
that.
only tutorial I have recorded thus far,
I like it.
but we were comparing the way he does it versus the way I do it. And
Uh-huh.
so having the two videos was really helpful. So, yes, feel free. There is that tutorial available
I will be
on the
checking that out
podcast YouTube
because
channel.
I will be checking that out
Yeah.
because I will take all the hints I can get right now. So,
Yep.
like I said, I'm a
Well,
baby knitter trying to learn.
and it doesn't make the SSK easier per se. It just cuts out steps. And there's a little tip in there on how to make it neater so that
Ooh,
it
I like neater.
actually matches your knit two together a little better. So
Okay,
those are all in there. And
good to
again,
know for next time I may remake this tank because I
yeah.
will be making another in another color.
Yay.
It's a beautiful
Always.
staple piece. It's a great staple piece. You'll have to see it.
Yeah, I will. So anyway, so going back to levels again, I really prefer when my designers use what skills are needed versus applying a level, even though I was taught to use levels, if that makes any sense.
I think everybody has just become very accustomed to levels, unfortunately, and I, so like, I've been crocheting for years, and there's some things that I don't do. I make cables, I can make picots. I can
Picos.
make yeah, there you go. I can make fancy edges. Do I like it? No. Will I do it? Not really, not unless I need to. There's a couple of patterns that I've had to because it makes the edging, but there are certain things that I just will not touch, and there's certain things that other people will not touch, and those skills may define it as a skill level. I consider myself an advanced intermediate. I don't consider myself an advanced crocheter, just because I won't. Do I understand the concept? Yes. Can I tech edit the concept? Yes. Will I personally execute the concept? No. And for that reason alone, well, and I'm just being honest. Like,
Yeah.
for that reason
No,
alone,
I
I
get
don't
it.
consider myself an advanced crocheter just because I do not want to. Broomstick lace. I have no desire to do broomstick lace. Some people consider broomstick lace an advanced, skill level. I have no desire to do it ever. It's beautiful. I love looking at it. I love watching people do it. I have no desire to do it. So, do I get it? Yeah. Can I edit it? Sure, all day long. But I don't personally have any desire to work on that skill set. So,
Gotcha.
I do like the idea of listing the skills needed or the stitches needed to be able to utilize. Um, and I think that's to a point. I think that's where the special skills or the special stitches section comes in, and making sure that everything's listed in the abbreviation section. But I do like being able to summarize skills needed underneath romancing the language intro. I do like.
Well, and the other thing too is you can use that skill level, skills used in your marketing just like you do with the
Mm-hmm.
romance versus uh you're not going to put your entire abbreviations list and techniques
Correct.
list
Yeah,
out
you're
there
not
as
going to list
marketing.
you're not going to list chain, you're not going to list knit, you're not going to list purl, but you can put knit two together, skip two together, double crochet two together, you know,
Right.
fan stitch kind of thing. So yeah,
Right.
I do like that concept, and that's
Yeah.
one thing that on the crochet side is not done very frequently, but maybe that's something that we can inspire makers to do.
I think you see it a lot more on the knitting side than
You
using
really do.
levels.
You really do.
Be
You really do. So, um, but I do think that it's one of those things that I think could be helpful to cross lines, cross crafts. I think that would be
right.
something that would be super useful to cross crafts on. So,
Right, right. Yeah, it's just one of those things that what's real life, what's practical versus what is the
theoretical.
yeah, that's the word I was looking
Yeah,
for. Thank you.
the theoretical, the academic, and maybe that's why we're also stuck on skill levels and such, is because of the academic worlds that we kind of grew up in. Is we're so used to, this is your level, this is your, this is what you have accomplished, and maybe that's where it stems from. But I was very, like I said, I was very intrigued to see it on that knit pattern, and that is one thing that I personally would love to see more on the crochet side, because like you, I think it makes it more, the patterns more accessible,
Yes.
because
Yeah,
I
and
was.
anything we can do to in, allow for accessibility, and that's going to take me off topic just a little bit because accessibility to the non-standard knitter slash crocheter. For example, our lovely friend Denise, who is having challenges with her vision
Mhm.
and having a pattern that allows for her to increase the font so that she can print it at a level she can read it, that sort of thing.
Correct.
Little things like that are things that we should start thinking about more in the industry
Mhm. That's one
because
of those
there's
things that I desperately want to figure out and learn how to make them more accessible for people like Denise, and people who, they're using screen readers or whatever. And I know there's a couple of other editors, I can't bring their names to mind right now, that they are very into that, and I'm like, I need to start devouring their blogs to figure out and learn, so that to be a better asset to my makers and to, my
exactly
designers, on how to help, because you're right,
there, and
accessibility is a thing.
there's a lot of things that go into that. And
A lot of things we don't even think about.
yeah, well, and for example, I have a dyslexic child,
Hmm.
and reading a pattern as a dyslexic is a completely different skill set.
Mhm.
Our former interviewee, Jill Wolcott, talks about how she changed the way she writes patterns because she herself is dyslexic.
Oh, okay.
That was a really interesting thing. Charts in particular, and the way she creates her charts are unique. And I'd love to learn. I need to spend the time to learn more on that because but different types of dyslexia require different types of assistance.
Mhm.
And my child is dyslexic not in what she reads, but in what she does with her hands.
Okay.
So it's a translation issue between what goes into the brain and what comes
From the
out
brain
through
to
the
the
muscles.
fingers. Correct.
So it affects the way she writes. It affects the way she does math. It can affect the way she interprets the movements required to create a knit or crochet stitch.
Okay.
While she has successfully managed to knit, excuse me, slight tummy issue there. Sorry about that. Um, she has successfully knit a hat. She was started off on a crochet learning process, and within a couple rows she gave it up because she just could not make her
Manipulate it.
hands work correctly. And I think it really would take more of a good crochet teacher and her watching versus trying to read it.
Yeah.
But how
And
can we
having
write
somebody
patterns?
and having somebody there with her would probably help that
Right.
too, where she can actually watch.
But how can we write patterns that meet that need? And
Yeah.
what do we need to change to do that is a big question mark in my mind a lot of the time because I'm
Yeah. That's
constantly
valid.
looking at patterns. Font. The font that
Font
people
is huge.
use. Where was I at? I was on a website the other day and the font was so, even as a non-dyslexic reader
Hmm.
who has admittedly old eyes, but not too bad a vision. I do have the beginnings of cataracts, but they're not bad. They're not like clouding my sight. But this font was so curly, I could not tell
You
the
couldn't even make it
difference.
out.
You couldn't tell the difference between an S and a Z. You couldn't tell the
Ooh.
difference between, a G and an E. Literally. It
Oh
was
wow.
that
That's
hard, and it
very
was
that's very curly.
trying to figure out by context what that letter was. Oh, it was horrid. It was absolutely
And
horrid.
that's one of those patterns I would probably immediately put down and walk away from, no matter how badly I wanted to make it.
Yeah,
That, or I
and
would copy and paste it into a document and change it into a more legible font.
yep, exactly. Um, i- so in thinking about our fonts, think about its clarity, and its clarity for those who might be dyslexic or might have some vision issues because that can affect
Hmm.
who can make
And
our
when
patterns.
the fonts are increased, even if you use a 12 or a 14 point font, or even if you go down to a 10, if somebody decides to increase it on their printing options or whatever the case may be, will that font increase at a legible rate that somebody, excuse me, that somebody can read it, and that's going to, clearly our coffee's kicking in, people.
Yes,
Will
clearly.
will that will that font increase at a legible rate,
Yeah,
to be able
exactly.
to be printed? So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And I've had a pattern come across my desk as a tech editor that I specifically said to the designer, I really think you need to rethink your font because it was a script font, and while it wasn't the one I was talking about a few moments ago, it still was enough that I felt that it made the pattern more difficult to read.
Yeah.
And before I even edited it, thankfully I had a Word doc and I changed the font so that I could print it and read
Hmm.
it better for myself. but I told them that I said, just really consider the fact that you've got people out there who cannot read those curls. So a sans serif font works a lot better, or at least if it's not a sans serif font, at least it's not a super scripty font,
Yeah.
which is awful. So that went a little off track, but
Yeah.
because we
But
were
at the
talking
same
about
time, it's what it
accessibility,
is.
that's what we do, guys. When we
And
just sit and chat.
this is exactly how our conversations go.
Yeah, that's why we can never seem to get off a phone call in less than an hour, even when we've got places to be.
And things to do. Exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
I know that in crochet in particular, there are very definite differences between British and American abbreviations and
Mhm.
stitch names,
Yes.
right? A single
Yeah.
crochet in American is a double crochet.
Yes. So I actually did. I have a when I can get myself together and I'm operating on all spoons and all levels. There is actually there is a very strong difference between U.S. and um, US and UK abbreviations.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is, and by the time that this post comes out, the post with Roe will have come out as well for languages, or for for languages. It's just like when we were talking with her about Dutch being different.
Right.
Um, Single crochet for us, for the US, is a single. For the UK, it's a double. For the US, a half double crochet is a half treble crochet. And then their double crochet is a treble crochet. I think they count the yarn overs. I'm not 100% sure, but that's the closest that I can come up to figuring it
Is there
out.
anywhere out there that has like a table with the differences?
So the Craft Yarn Council actually has some of the abbreviations. I found some when I went through. I do a tech edit Tuesday/Thursday, depending on what day I can get my stuff together. And I actually did a 3-part segment over 3 weeks of the differences to consider between US UK. One of them was the definitions. One of them was the measurements, because we and this is something that I don't think that knitting does, but something that crochet does, is our hooks are labeled with I have that one here that just show you perfectly, is they letters,
Yes.
is the letters, and then um, possibly the millimeters, or the very random numbers that were created for whatever reason. I haven't done the research on that, so I'm not trying to speak to that portion. But usually it's like for the US hooks, it's so like an H8, which is a 5 millimeter hook. Well, guess what? The UK makers typically only go by millimeters, and most of the knitting needles, as far as I can tell, go by millimeters. There are random numbers I've noticed.
Okay. There's actually 3 different ways they can be labeled depending on how old they are,
Oh,
because
okay.
the US has one system, the UK had another system, and then they've now gone to millimeters. And
Correct.
the US and the UK systems were originally based on wire gauge numbers.
Okay.
So for US, we go, the very smallest is a quad 0, so it's
Yeah.
0000. And I say the smallest that you generally can find. I think there was at one point a smaller one, but it was such a fine gauge wire that it really, they were
Didn't work for
basically
anything.
using wire,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then we go up from there, and we have odd breaks because at 10, it goes 10, 10 and a half, 11.
Hmm.
And then it skips to 13 and then it skips to 15.
Okay, so that explains the numbers on, because I did notice on my needles the other day they actually matched the number on my hook. And I was very intrigued by that, but again, I hadn't done the research. So that explains, because I
So
think my
probably crochet hooks were based a little on
I
wire
would
gauge sizes as
yeah, that
well.
makes sense.
But then in the UK, the numbers are reversed. So
Okay.
their little sizes are the higher numbers and their big sizes are the smaller numbers. And I don't know what they did when they got to like the 15s because by then they've run out of numbers.
Right.
But the US 7 and the UK 7 are the only one that are the same millimeter size. But
Okay.
now the
That's the
industry
cross
is
point.
right. The industry is moving towards this millimeter size
I
because
think
it's
the
more
millimeters
global.
is, yeah, the millimeters is way more global and it's definitely more understandable. I like having it. But as an editor, I definitely advocate for listing all of the sizes because, like you said, depending on how old the hook is or the needle is, it may only list one size. And
Right.
somebody's not going to go run down to the craft store just to buy a hook or a needle that says what you're looking for. By listing it in the pattern, you save them the time of having to go look it up.
Now,
And
I will say in knitting, we generally list the US size and the millimeter size. We tend to ignore the old UK numbers.
mhm,
Because there was such a short list of them, it's really easy to look it up. And
mhm,
B, because they've been on the millimeter system long enough that most people know how to convert it anyway.
okay.
So we list US and we list millimeter. And I will also say that it's a little bit of American ego that we still have to list the US sizes
Mhm.
because as Americans, we tend to ignore that millimeter when we shouldn't.
That's true, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Because
I've
it
tried.
it it makes it easier to,
Yeah,
like you said, it's more accessible to use the millimeter, but that's one of those things when I'm editing, I definitely go in and I'm like, somebody will list the millimeter on the hook and I'm like, "Hey, put these other numbers in. Here's what the rest of it is." The Craft Yarn Council's got a great listing of it on their website of what, and they've even got the knitting needles listed of
yes.
millimeter to the number or whatever it is. And
If I'm not if
I
I'm
will
not
go in and list
mistaken,
it.
the knitting needles table in sizes at Craft Yarn Council includes the UK, so it
It's
has all three.
millimeter in US. It does not. I'm looking at
Really,
the
I
website
thought the
right now.
standards document had. Maybe
Oh, the
they.
document might. The document might. I'm looking at the actual like quick link website.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, the downloadable standards document, if I'm
okay,
not mistaken,
that would make sense.
actually lists all three. Let me see. Oh, that's not going to work on my system because I am
You
tied
know
up.
you're a tech editor. You know you're a tech editor when you can lay hands on that document very quickly. And I have one printed out somewhere, but I don't know where it ended up in the move. So, but I have actually have the hook and needle portion website bookmarked. But I'm I do advocate while you're looking that up. I do advocate for listing both for knitting, the millimeter and the US, and then in crochet, the letter number combination, and then the millimeter, because, like I said, depending on how old the hook or the needle is, it may or may not be listed on the piece,
Right.
and you save somebody from having to go look it up. And if nothing else, you make your maker's life a little bit easier, and
No,
that's something that they actually will remember.
I actually lied because I printed it and it does just have the US in the millimeter range
Okay.
because I printed both the crochet and the knitting needles
Mm-hmm.
so that I had a ready. I've got this little notebook I use when I'm editing, and I
Yeah.
have the charts taped in the front and the back of it. And
Yeah.
no, they didn't. I thought at one point they did have the UK sizes in the
They may
PDF,
have.
but I could be wrong.
Well, and that could be something that they took out years ago or
And the
whatever on
other
an
thing
update.
could be that when I trimmed down the document to tape it into my notebook, I may have just taken the UK sizes off of it.
Yeah.
I may
But
have done
yeah,
that. Anyway,
I doubt it. But yeah, I did a 3-part section on the US versus UK, and one of them was the abbreviations, one of them was the hooks, and then the other one was actually, and I think a lot of knitters will actually do this as well, was consideration for measurements of showing especially on your gauge square, if your gauge square is 4 by 4, listing it as a 10 by 10, so that the imperial, or for the metric makers, they will understand what the conversion rate, general rough conversion rate will be for whatever you're working on,
right.
because the and the she's going to have all these links listed in the show notes, if you guys want to go in and look at it. But like converting inches to centimeters, 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. Well, if you're converting centimeters to inches, 1 centimeter is 0.3937 inches. So those conversions can be very different. And
Well, and what we do in the knitting industry, okay, in reality, the 1 inch is 2.54 centimeters
mm-hmm,
in real life.
mm-hmm,
In knitting, and I'm assuming the same is true in crochet, is that we convert at that 2.5. So we've
mm-hmm,
already rounded
correct.
to
We do
make the
the same thing.
conversion easier.
Correct. Yes, we do that the same in crochet, and that's what I'm saying is I, I find it necessary to list what measurement system you are using in your notes and in your gauge swatch, because if somebody's not going to read the notes, they better be reading the gauge swatch, and if you list it there, they should get a rough idea of what your measurement is.
Well, and as a tech editor that does grading, okay,
Mm-hmm.
all of the measurements listed, because in knitting, we try really hard to list both the imperial and the metric in every pattern. Not every designer does. There
Mm-hmm.
are some designers out there that design in metric, and that's all they really want in their patterns, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And the same is true of imperial. But we have to remember the US is the last country in the world that actually uses imperial measurements.
Yeah.
The difference that there is one other country in the world that does not use metric, and that's China, but they have their own measurement system.
Yeah, they have a whole different measurement system there. Yeah.
So there, I don't even have details on what that measurement system is, but it is completely different from either the imperial or the metric.
Mm-hmm.
It's closer to imperial than it is to metric,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still different from. And Japan, in their garment industry, has a unique measurement system as well. And if you learn that one, it's probably even more precise than metric,
Okay.
because it I don't know how it was developed, but I have friends who have worked in the garment industry in the past, and they loved being able to use the Japanese methods for measuring because it made your curves
Mm-hmm.
much nicer and things like that.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah, it's a really unique system, and I've done just a little bit of delving into it at one point, and it was like, yeah, that's going to take too much brain power right now. But it really is. It's an extremely precise measuring system. But so
Interesting.
in knitting, we do that automatic rounding right from the
Mm-hmm.
start, and that
Yeah,
rounding has to stay true throughout the pattern. So
correct.
as I'm grading a garment, and I will say this, I like to grade in metric
Mm-hmm.
and then convert to imperial, but all conversions are done at that 2.5 rate
Yeah.
so that the pattern actually comes out the way your gauge lists it.
Correct. Correct. So let me ask you, circling back on the UK US difference, is there a difference in knitting between US and UK? So, like, we were talking with Ro, and she said, what was it? She said a double crochet was a stick, I think is what she said.
Yes.
And then we call it a double crochet, and then the UK calls it a treble. So is there a difference in US UK in knitting?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Well, what I said is true. There's not a lot of difference between US and UK terminology in knitting. There are a couple of abbreviations that are slightly different, usually in terms of where the yarn is placed. So, with yarn forward, with yarn back. We would say in the US, with yarn in front, with yarn in back. So, there's slight changes, but very little. I've never run across specific abbreviations that were completely different. I say that.
I can't
No,
imagine. I can't imagine that there would be much difference worldwide. But again, I'm a very ignorant baby knitter, so that's why I'm asking, because I personally don't know.
I know we've had this discussion in one of my groups, but there really is very little difference.
Okay,
Um, there might be a different name for a cast on, for example,
that's valid.
but
Though
there's not a difference.
there seems to be a ton of different names for various cast-ons that are essentially the same thing.
Yes, but there's not a big difference per se in, say, the abbreviations and how you
Okay.
manipulate the stitches to get to achieve that terminology for that abbreviation.
Okay.
Uh, so no, there's not as big a difference in knitting as there is in crochet from that,
Yeah. And
and
that's one of those. Go ahead.
that could be in part because of the difference in how knitting and crochet evolved
That's possible.
and where they evolved.
That's possible. And
I don't.
and
How
just as
old
a
is crochet?
much younger
What's the?
than knitting.
I was going to say, what's the oldest example of crochet? Do we know?
I've seen it somewhere, but I cannot. That's one of those trivial details I cannot bring to mind. I will be very honest.
Right.
Um, but I do know that it is much younger than knitting. Um,
And so
I
it
don't
may
know.
have evolved separately on the different continents
That's very
versus
possible.
knitting was brought from the European
From me,
continent
yeah,
to the Americas.
yeah. So it
Crochet may have
evolved.
kind of evolved separately on both, which makes for the difference.
Yeah,
Now, I
and the
know the
difference.
Dutch to English is a lot to do with simply the language difference.
Very much so. Yeah, and I think that's actually a lot of crochet differences. Like, for the different countries that call them different things, it is just a language thing. And as an editor, that's why I advocate to list not only what measurement system you're using, but also what terms you're using. Um, because it does
Yes.
make a difference. If you're writing your pattern in US and you put it as a treble, and it's a UK maker, but you don't list whether it's a treble US or treble UK. So it's a US maker listing it as a treble, which is going to be a larger stitch, and then it's a UK maker that doesn't know which treble it is, so they're going to go with their treble. It's a smaller stitch.
Right.
So I I'm very I advocate that being listed in all of my all of my designers patterns because of that difference. And I actually have an Irish designer, and she I was blown away when I saw her first pattern. She actually listed both. She actually had two columns running for the two different, because with her being in Ireland, she has both over there. and she listed one column US and one column UK, and it was beautifully done, and I was so excited to see that, and I was so proud of her for that. And I was like, I love the accessibility in this.
Yeah,
So,
I was gonna say that talk about a truly accessible pattern because no matter
hmm
where you buy it, you're going to be able to follow what's comfortable for you
yeah, yeah, it was
rather than
really cool.
having
I
to
was
learn
very,
that difference.
yeah,
Because
it was really cool.
I can see where if I were working from a UK based pattern, that I might even want to sit down and rewrite it in US terminology just so that
Yeah,
my brain knew where it was going. Because,
yeah,
well, I would say you say you're a baby knitter. I'm kind of a baby crocheter, even though I've done it almost as long as I've knit, but I haven't learned the techniques as well.
yeah.
I haven't
And
spent the
I
time on it.
believe, and this is not a paid endorsement by any stretch of the imagination, I believe that the platform Ribbler will actually convert the pattern from one terminology to the other. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe I remember seeing that in their stuff somewhere along the way, that was something that they were very proud of, and I thought that was a really cool detail that they were going to be doing. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. That is
because
definitely
you're talking about changing a
interesting.
pattern. I think I remember seeing that somewhere. I'm not
That's
100%,
cool.
but I'm pretty confident. So,
Yeah, because Ribbler, it when you buy a pattern on Ribbler, it actually is kind of it stays within their platform.
hmm
You're not actually downloading it as a PDF.
correct. Yeah, they have everything within their platform. Everything stays there, and so you can go through and you can mark off which row you're on, and you can go through and you can mark off whatever. And it changed as if I remember, and y'all don't quote me on this. You're gonna have to look into it yourself, but e- I believe that it changes the language and will change the terminology to your home preferred. Now, it may not be grammatically correct, but because I believe Ribbler is a UK based platform that is accessible to both UK and US makers, and that's one of their things. So I thought that was a
Interesting.
really cool thing.
Yeah, totally cool.
So,
Well, one last question from me as a non crochet expert. How do you count gauge in your patterns? It's still
so
stitches and rows.
it's still stitches and rows. That's very similar to stitches and rows. Um, we count the center of the stitch where the actual stitch is, not across the top, but the actual stitch itself, because the way that the completion of the last yarn over completion actually carries to the next stitch. So we count the body of the stitch itself, but it's still stitches and rows, just like it is in knitting. It just you count the middle of the stitch, not the top of the stitch.
But in counting
Excuse me.
stitches for a row, I know there's a couple of different ways. If you're actually manipulating a pattern and putting it together, the there's a question sometimes as to whether you're counting the chains that you do at the beginning to start a row, whether that's counted as a stitch or not.
Correct. So that's not necessarily gauge as towards
Right.
stitch totals on
R-
per row, because the turning chains actually create the height at the beginning to allow the row to grow as it needs to. So like a single crochet gets one chain, a double crochet will get two to three chains depending on who it is. And there, depending on the maker, there may or may not be one or two extra, one or two gives on a non-tested pattern. And I'm going to clarify non-tested pattern, because if you're testing, you need to make sure you're following the pattern as it is written by your designer, so that you can give them clear feedback to make sure it's being tested and comes out as it should. If you're just making it to make it on your own, then yeah, if I'm making a garment for me, and it is already published. It's out there. I've paid for it. I use 2 chains for my double crochet because my chains have a tendency to be just a slight bit taller than most people. Um, but if I'm testing a garment and they say chain 3, I chain 3 and I go with my double that way.
Okay.
But and
But
that's knowing your
there is a
loops.
question about whether that is counted as a stitch, and is that
Correct.
something as a tech editor that you look at and say, are they being consistent with whether they
Yes.
count it or not? Are they listing whether they count
Yes.
it or not?
And that's one of those things as an editor, they need to, I look for it being listed in the notes section. And or and I say and or because some designers do both and some designers do one or the other. I look for it being listed somewhere that the turning chains do or do not count. And some designers will list it in the notes section that some turning chains count, some turning chains don't. It will be listed in the pattern. Some designers list it straight off in the notes section. All turning chains count as stitches, or none of the turning chains count. And then some of them put it in the pattern, and that's only where they put it is chain 3, all turning chains do not count, or chain 3, all turning chains do count. So that does need to be listed somewhere because that goes against your stitch count at the end. Because if you don't, if you do not specify whether it counts or does not count, then that goes against the stitch total, and you may be off, a full stitch, and you're going to make somebody crazy going, where am I missing my stitch? I've accounted for every stitch. Well, if you're turning chain, if you don't list it, then they're going to make themselves
Right.
crazy trying to figure it out.
Well, I know that when I was learning to grade, there was a crochet designer talking about grading crochet designs, and that was one of the things that she talked about, was the fact that whether or not that is counted as a stitch can affect
Mm-hmm.
how it's graded. And so it
Oh,
was like,
interesting.
oh, I never thought about that.
I wouldn't have thought about that either. Clearly, I don't grade. It's on my wish list, but I haven't gotten into it yet. So that's good to know,
Right.
though.
Yeah. So it was an interesting little thing that kind of stuck in the back of my head because, like I said,
Yeah.
I do have a bucket list item of making a crocheted garment.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't found the one I want to make yet, although I've seen one pattern that I'm really close to choosing. It's a cardigan that Denise actually showed to me, and I went, "Ooh, that is really cool." But as a result, I'm not as familiar with that kind of thing, and so it just kind of stuck in the back of my head.
Yeah, no, that's it, and that's a very valid thing that it is actually on my checklist of things that I look for when I'm editing of, do turning chains count or do they not? And that's something that I specifically look for. And if it's not listed anywhere, I ask, that's one of those notes I throw up there on the notes section is, do turning chains count? Do they not?
Right.
So, yes.
Right. Okay.
So I
Well,
actually have a quick question for you
yeah.
from the crocheter to the knitter. And this is something that I was thinking about as we were talking about this is, do y'all, and I don't, baby knitter, only looked at a couple patterns. Do y'all list your increases and decreases in a special way when you're writing patterns? So like typically in crochet, we list increases on the front of the stitch, and then, well, let me rephrase this. It's not increases and decreases, it's increases in standard number of stitches. So like if I want you to increase 3 stitches in the same space, we would put three and then the stitch. So like 3 single crochets. Whereas if I want you to stitch 1 stitch in the next 3 stitches, it would be single crochet 3. Does that make sense?
I think so. Single crochet 3, you're doing just 3 stitches.
Correct.
And those stitches are all done based on the stitches down below.
Correct. 1 stitch
But
per matching stitch.
but the other way you said it was single crochet
You put
3?
3 stitches into 1 stitch.
Right.
You would increase 3 to 1.
Well, in knitting, it's um, in knitting, it's a little different in the fact that it's which increase or which decrease are you doing, and so the abbreviation itself tells you, are you doing 3 into 1 or 2 into 1, or are you increasing by knitting 2 stitches into the same stitch. It's based on, it's the abbreviation and the stitch you're doing. So the
Oh,
SSK,
okay.
right? The SSK
Right.
is a
It's a specific
right
decrease.
leaning decrease.
Okay.
Okay, no, it's a left leaning decrease. I'm sorry. Which the SSK, you have moved. You're knitting 2 stitches together, but how you're doing it puts the right hand stitch on top of the left hand stitch,
Mm-hmm.
which makes that lean to the left.
Okay.
A knit 2 together does the exact opposite. It knits the 2 stitches so that the left hand stitch is on top, and so it leans to the right.
Okay.
So how our decreases and increases are specified is by telling them what stitch to accomplish and where.
I
A
got you.
make 1 is usually interpreted, and I'm going to say right now, this is a big bone of mine. I think there is a big problem with the way we designate the make 1 in knitting, because a make 1 is understood to be lift the bar in between the the 2 stitches. So you've knit 1
Mm-hmm.
stitch, you've got a stitch on the left hand needle. You're going to lift that thread that connected the one on the left stitch to the needle, to the
Mm-hmm.
previous stitch, and you're going to increase with that bar.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in years past, that make 1 was not accomplished in that bar.
Okay.
That was a lifted make 1.
Okay.
Okay. So today we use make 1 to designate the bar when it shouldn't be it, because you're lifting a new stitch from thread that's down below instead of making one in a stitch that's already existing. But to me, I'm not being very clear here. Forgive me, I've not been sleeping real well.
So
But
like
look
knit,
up the difference between a
knit
make 1.
front, like knit front back is, it tells you that you're increasing by knitting the front and the back of the stitch.
And the abbreviation knit front back itself is telling, when you give the definition of what a knit front back is, you're
Mm-hmm.
saying knit in the front of the stitch, and without removing it from the left hand needle, knit into the back of the stitch and then remove it from the left hand needle.
Okay,
So
that
it's
makes
telling you
sense.
automatically, by the way you give the direction, you are increasing, you are taking that 1 stitch and turning it into 2, and this is how you're going to do it.
Okay.
Same with your decreases. You're taking however many stitches
And
and
putting
turning them into
together.
1 stitch.
Okay.
Now, I can get into a long discussion about, you can also do 3 to 2, and you can also do
Yeah.
4
Well,
to,
and we could. Yeah.
but look at your abbreviations list, because they're going to define whatever that, they're going to give you the letter abbreviation. The KFB means knit front back. They're going to say KFB. They're going to say it means knit front back. And they should tell you that you're going to knit into the front of the stitch, leaving it on the left-hand needle. Then you're going to knit into the back of the stitch and remove it from the left-hand needle, turning 1 stitch into 2. They should give that instruction. However, a lot of patterns you see will just give you KFB means knit front back, and they don't go further and give you the actual
Tutorial.
method, the tutorial.
Yeah.
And
And that may be just because some makers are, you know, they have a preferred way of doing it, I guess. But I can't
well,
imagine that
and
there's more than one way to do a knit front back.
there's not more ways to do a knit front back, but there are multiple ways to do an SSK.
Yeah, that
Some
I
of
can
them are right
understand.
and some of them are wrong. This is Elizabeth Zimmerman was the knitting guru,
Hmm.
right? She's like she was like the person who made knitting a thing in the 70s.
Hmm.
And she decided that the SSK didn't look right, and she tried to fix it by doing it a different way. It doesn't fix it, it just changes the way it looks.
Okay.
And so there's now like probably
10.
10 different ways or 6 different ways to do an SSK,
So
some
you need
of
to
which
clarify which way you're
twist
going
the
to do
stitches
it.
correctly and some of them don't. So you need to specify in your pattern what way you did it, even if your knitter doesn't follow that, just so that they know how that to get the same look you got, do it this way.
Hmm. That makes
Knit front
sense.
back, same thing. So yeah.
Interesting.
So it's not
Okay.
that there are different ways to there's different ways to write it, but it's in terms of which
The actual abbreviation you use
the actual abbreviation you
versus
use, the actual method you use to do it.
which
Yeah.
is different than us because we list the number at the front. Unless it's specified elsewhere, whether it's in the notes section, the abbreviation section, the special section, special stitches section, typically the number at the front lists how many stitches you're going to put into the next spot. And then you go, then you keep going. And then the number
Right.
behind the stitch is you put one stitch in the next X amount of stitches.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, this has
Very
been a
interesting.
very
It's been a learning
insightful
experience.
conversation. It really has, actually.
Experience. And quite frankly, what I thought was going to be a short episode has now run over an
It
hour.
is it did not turn into the short episode we thought this was going to be. We talked about this before we started recording. We're like, oh, we're just going to go over the questions. This is going to be a short episode. Looking at the time chart right now, we're at an hour 5. So this definitely did not turn into the short episode that we were anticipating. But you know what? It has been a learning experience, which is not a bad thing for either of us. And for those who cross crafts, I would be interested in their feedback to see what they think and what we
Yes, definitely.
missed. And for anybody who does cross crafts, hit either one of us up or hit the Facebook group or Ravelry group up and let us know what our thoughts are between the cross crafts and what we should talk about next, because
Yeah,
clearly there's a
always.
lot of differences between the crafts that even as baby stitchers on the other craft we don't necessarily think about. So
Exactly.
interesting.
So, yeah, and Tiffany's right. I would love it if you guys would start conversations in our groups, either the Ravelry or the Facebook group, or you can always email us, as I say at the end of every episode, at knitdesignedit@gmail.com.
Yeah, or
And
catch us on our individual emails or Instagrams.
and I did want to go back and clarify the 3-part posts that you did comparing UK and US was on your Instagram account.
They were on my Instagram account. They were actually in the newsletter as well. They are I believe I got them listed on my blog on my website. The Instagram links will be in the show notes. I will try to find the blog links to send to you as well.
Wonderful.
But the Instagram links will definitely be in the show notes for
Okay,
anybody who
great.
wants to check it out.
I'm going to have to spend some time there. Next month I'm going to be
you're
gonna
have some downtime, so
well,
you're gonna have some time to learn.
People, I'm saying next month. Actually, it will be the month this episode airs. I will be down for the count for an undetermined period of time. So you'll hear more about that soon.
You'll be better, so that's fine. Well,
Yep.
I hate to do this, my love, but I have to run. I have things to do and
Don't we all?
places to be. So
Love.
this was very 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 educational. I'm glad y'all hit us up with ideas so that we can do this again, because I think more than one person's going to be learning from this episode, including us.
Oh, definitely. Love you.
Love you. Be good.
Come back next time when Denise and I talk with Lily Chin, knit and crochet designer and teacher. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen, and join the conversation in our Ravelry or Facebook groups. For show notes or knit tech editing and related services, please visit my website at arcticedits.com. To inquire about crochet tech editing and other services Tiffany provides, please go to wootcrafts.com.